Hello, so I'm just at college at the minute and yeah, I've had about 4 hours sleep and I'm trying to write this essay, the one I've literally been thinking and talking about for the last few weeks and yeah, I feel like some of it's okay but it's not good enough. Like, I might be setting the standards a little bit too high because I got an A on my last essay, so like I'm sort of hoping to do alright on this one. But the last one, it was a different setup. It was like we had to revise and then we sat in the classroom for an hour and then did it that way, in a time limit. But we've been given quite a lot of freedom, which is a good thing because we're allowed to like sort of take our time on it and edit as we're going along and yeah, like, but also I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so it sort of sets me up for I guess a lot of overthinking and whether what I'm writing is good or bad. It's like I'm good at having the ideas. I've got like so many different ideas wrote down in my phone about it, and I've got about 5 different introductions, and it's like, which one do I choose? Which one's better? And then I was like, well, it doesn't matter because they're all probably going to get me credit anyway. But then it was like, well, some things are better than other things, otherwise certain pieces of work wouldn't get graded lower than others. And it's like, because I know I've got the capability to do it, I just don't know how to separate the good ideas from the bad ideas. Like, I feel like I know what's relevant to the essays. It's conscience is just a fancy name for old-fashioned feelings. I get that, but I feel like I'm just explaining Freud too much and not enough evaluation. And I don't know, maybe I just can't be bothered. I don't know. It's difficult. And it's like, it's due in tomorrow morning as well, and I want to have something to hand in, but I want the thing that I'm doing to be adequate. Like, I don't want it just to be like a piece of shit that looks like I spent 5 minutes on, and it probably won't look like that, and that's probably just in my head, but yeah. Just gonna complain about it, really. I might just read out what I've got so far, and then I'll just listen to this back. And because I feel like if I can hear myself reading what I've got, it might make a little bit more sense to me. I'm gonna do that. Okay. To be able to answer this question, we have to first define what the words mean and decide whether there are contextual implications. As later Wittgenstein said, ethical problems arise when language goes on holiday. Different scholars define these words differently based on their perspectives. Some may even doubt the existence of such concepts. For example, Freud doubted the fact that we have conscience, but perhaps this is just unintentional semantics on his part. And others deny the practicality of applying feelings to ethical decisions, or, for example, Kantian Aquinas. So yeah, I feel like that introduction is going to be okay. That's the one I've chosen anyway. But maybe I'm focusing too much on the ethical language. Maybe, I don't know. I think I'm just going to keep that anyway. Okay. Paragraph 1. Multiple credible philosophers and religious scholars hold the notion that feelings make us animal-like, and we have to control them by exercising right reason. This is apparent in Plato's charioteer analogy. The charioteer, reason, has to keep the black horse, emotions, in check in order to have a balanced soul. Kant's deontological absolutist approach treats ethics as a mathematical problem which can be worked out with logic. He didn't think emotions should play any part in making ethical decisions, which has led many to criticise his views. Probably due to his sheltered life, he fails to acknowledge that emotions seem to be a big part of the human experience. To completely dismiss feelings would be to dismiss an inevitable part of our experience. This leads us to believe that perhaps conscience is not so disconnected from feelings, but emotions are definitely not the be-all and end-all in making moral judgments. It would be an understatement to make feelings equivalent to conscience. Perhaps a sensible assumption to make would be emotions plus right reason equals conscience. Okay. So far we can see that there is way more to our conscience than just mere feelings. Conscience seems to be a reason-based process. Feelings, however, are innate and inevitable, which is perhaps why many philosophers perceive them to be inferior to reason. Any animal has the ability to feel, but it is not so apparent that they have the same capacity to reason. However, perhaps this is an outdated perspective centered on the idea that we are made in the image of God and not a product of evolution. 13th century Christian philosopher Aquinas strongly advocated for the use of right reason and the virtue of prudence, influenced by Aristotle's virtue ethics. We use this to unlock synderesis, which is the knowledge of the good, and apply it to conscientia, which is the application of the good to everyday situations. Aquinas did not simply think conscience is the direct voice of God. Instead, he believed that God gave us reason, the means to use our conscience. This makes Aquinas' view universal because his theory is applicable to secular individuals as well as religious individuals due to his emphasis on reason. Okay. Aquinas' views on the good are quite loose. He claims that we don't necessarily have to define the good, but we have a general knowledge of what it is, which allows us to work towards it. For this reason, we are able to compare Aquinas to Mu's intuitionism. Good is like yellow, not like a horse. We know it when we see it, but are unable to dissect it into parts in order to explain it clearly. It's just something we recognise. However, we can criticise his views due to the problem of objectivity. He assumes there is an ultimate good, but doesn't take into account the fact that what is good for one person may be bad for another. Perhaps good is subjective. A rather extreme example of this is sadistic psychopaths. These individuals derive pleasure from causing harm to others. We may say that they lack conscience, but conscience is quite an ambiguous term. Different scholars define it differently. For example, Aquinas sees conscience as a positive thing, which guides us towards the good, whereas Freud sees it as a negative thing, which is centered on guilt from our repressed libido, the id, and internalized ideals of our parents. This is a quote from Freud. Civilization therefore obtains mastery over the individual's dangerous desire for aggression by weakening and disarming it by setting up an agency within him to watch over it like a garrison in a conquered city. Okay, this last paragraph I don't think I've got quite right. Perhaps Freud's perspective that conscience is a purely emotional phenomenon is shaped by his secular outlook. Had Freud become before the Darwinian era, his views may have been very different, maybe even replicating that of Aquinas or other religious thinkers. Freud's views are rather nihilistic or perhaps pessimistic in comparison to Aquinas. Maybe this is due to his rejection of religious values and dismissal of intrinsic truth or intrinsic meaning. He compares humanity to advanced animals. We are not made in the image of God. Religion is just wish fulfillment in Freud's eyes. Back when we lived in primal hearts, we wanted to find explanations for the unknown because what we don't know scares us. We figured that perhaps things happen in the world because someone is causing them to happen. Based on this explanation, we were able to derive the fact that perhaps we could influence the being causing the disasters. We performed rituals and found a correlation between the ritual and the natural disaster. It seemed to subside, so this is where religious rituals came from. But that last bit I think is irrelevant to the question because it's about conscience. And that's just saying more like where Freud believed religion came from, but then again, it's sort of relevant, but it's a little bit distant because religion for thinkers like Aquinas it influences their views on the conscience. For example, having an objective version of the good which we're trying to work towards, which is also linked to Plato's cave analogy of the sun in the sky, and that is the objective good, or the highest form of the good. So yeah, but Freud doesn't believe this. He doesn't. I don't think he believes in intrinsic good and bad. I think he's more like it's just something we're socialized into believing. So yeah, it's a little bit difficult because I feel like it's okay. I don't think it's as bad as I thought it was, perhaps, but this last paragraph there's too much explanation on where Freud thinks religion came from, and I think I really need to sort that out. And I'm probably just overstressing that or something. I just want to do I need to write a paragraph on Erich Fromm as well, and I can compare him to Freud by saying Freud says conscience is just old-fashioned emotions, and then I'll perhaps say what old-fashioned emotions means. I don't know. I don't quite know how I'm going to go about that. And then Erich Fromm takes a more sociological perspective and says that our conscience is influenced by the state and the political affairs which are going on in the country. And I could perhaps mention about an authoritarian conscience and a humanitarian conscience. And yeah. And then to conclude, I can say that all of the scholars they're almost aiming at looking at it from a completely different perspective, so maybe we can't really compare them adequately. I don't know. My throat's hurting. Yeah, so it's like because they're all taking complete different perspectives and are basing their ideas around different value systems. We can't really compare the three because Fromm was a socialist, almost communist, so he's looking from that perspective, whereas Freud was a psychologist / anthropologist, so he's from that perspective, whereas Aquinas is taking a religious perspective, which assumes that there is an ultimate good, whereas the other two don't necessarily see that. So yeah, so can we so from based on that conclusion we can state that there is no objective definition of the word conscience, because conscience is pretty much dependent on context, I guess, or on the subjective nature of the individual who's using the word. It's whatever they want to interpret it as. So we can't necessarily say whether conscience is just a fancy word for old-fashioned feelings, because for Freud it might be, but for Aquinas it isn't. For Freud it's not, because conscience and emotions are pretty much equivalent, whereas for Aquinas they're very distinct, because conscience is something we work towards using reason. So yeah, I think I've figured it out. I'm able to talk about it. If I can just get all this out of my head and put it onto the paper, that'll be perfect, and everything will be fine. Okay, thanks for watching.